In a previous video, I had promised to talk about an immigrant refugee Egyptian. And so I thought I'd invite her. And I thought I thought I'd invite her to tell her story.
Well, I was raised in Egypt, and I was raised in Egypt because my mom was English, and during the war, she was a nurse on the hospital ship, the Queen Mary, which used to dock in the harbor at Alexandria on a very regular basis. So eventually, she told us that, you know, the nurses and the doctors all used to come off board and party in Alexandria, Egypt. And at one point, she met my dad at one of these parties. Must have been love at first sight, because in 1944 they got married. And hence, my sister and I were raised in Egypt. My mother had been born in Stoke-on-Trent. So that particular spot always had I wanted to see Stoke-on-Trent, had a soft spot in my heart. Anyway, we were raised in Egypt, and in 1956, Gamal Abdel Nasser, the new president at the time, decided that he wanted to make Egypt for the Egyptians. Egypt for the Egyptians. So those of us who were not Egyptian had to leave. The French, the English, and the Americans. Well, they approached my dad and said that she had to go, my mom had to go. And my dad said, well, she's my wife, where am I going to send her? Anyway, that fiasco quietened down after a while. But things were not comfortable for us. My sister and I went to a wonderful English school in Egypt called the English Girls College, and it was run by Britishers. The teachers were all British, and the tutorship was based on the English system here in England. So when the so-called troubles started in Alexandria in Egypt, school closed immediately. Boy, the British teachers, they were gone. No, they didn't spare a moment. So school closed down. And our tutorship at the time then was handed over to our lovely piano teacher, Mrs. Cavalian, who taught us whatever she could. She kept us up on math and English essays and dictation and etc., etc. So we didn't really stop our studies, but anyway, pretty soon the school reopened, and in order to maintain and to keep their emblem, which was the EGC on our pockets and on whatever other emblems they were on the school, which stood for the English Girls College, the name was changed to the El Nasr Girls College so that we could keep all our signage exactly the same. Except for one thing. For the first time in my life, we used to have to salute the flag first thing in the morning. So we all stood in the quad, all us girls in our gray uniforms and ties and everything, and we had to salute the flag. تحيا الجمهورية العربية المتحدة. 3 times. تحيا الجمهورية العربية المتحدة. تحيا الجمهورية العربية المتحدة. تحيا الجمهورية العربية المتحدة. So, I don't know why I kind of liked it. I liked kind of being caught up with all that Egypt for the Egyptian stuff. I considered myself an Egyptian. I hadn't known any other life, and I spoke fairly fluent Arabic. But that was in by 1960, things became a little rough for those of us who kind of looked like I did with the blue eyes and the fair hair. My dad was olive-skinned and dark eyes. He was Armenian. But my mom and myself, you know, we still liked to walk the streets and go shopping at les grands magasins Anneau and to eat pastries and pastrudis and all of that, but it became more and more uncomfortable. So my dad said finally one day, he said, you know what, we got to get you out of here. You have to go to England. You're going to go to England, stay with your English family, and I'll work at getting us out of here. That was my dad. So we wrote to my Aunt Lena, and she said, yes, absolutely, come on by. Now I was a teenager at the time, so my sister and I. We packed our bags and sailed on the name of the ship was the Muhammad Ali, and it was 1960, and the song that was most famous in the Middle East was Ya Mustafa, Ya Mustafa, Ana Bahabbak, Ya Mustafa. I used to have a really fun time playing on the piano on the ship, Ya Mustafa, and people would come around and we'd all sing Ya Mustafa because we all left from Alexandria and the ship was going to Piraeus in Greece. So we did the ship from Alex to Piraeus and then trained it and across the channel, the British Channel, on a little boat until we got to Stoke-on-Trent, where my grandmother was still alive, my mom's mother. She was still alive. So we spent that first summer, the summer of 1960, at her farm in Stoke-on-Trent, England. My English grandmother never had a nail file in her life. She always used to go like this with her fingernails. And her house was brick. And all the sides of her house, especially by the door, was all marked like this. And she would just come out and go like this and file her nails. It was amazing. Mom's mother, she was still alive. So we spent that first summer, the summer of 1960, at her farm in Stoke-on-Trent, England. Endon Road, Endon Edge, Stoke-on-Trent, England. And then when the school year started, we went down to Essex, and my sister and I went to school in Essex for a year until my dad decided it was time to leave Egypt. He left with my mom, who, by the way, my mother returned to Egypt after having deposited us in England here. And he collected the rest of the family, was not able to sell off the business because by 1961, the Egyptians had gotten the idea that if they let us kick all the Americans, the British and the French out of the country, there'll be nothing left to sustain the country financially. So exit visas were now no longer granted if they thought you were going to leave on a permanent basis. So my dad couldn't sell the business, and nor could he sell the apartment. They worked like a condo. You paid a certain amount for the privilege of living in that beautiful apartment of ours, and then a monthly fee of £12 a month. So anyway, couldn't sell anything. He closed off the business, and he dropped the apartment key down the elevator shaft and got on an airplane out of Cairo, Egypt, to England, and said to himself and the rest of the family, which included my mother, my Aunt Margie, and my grandma, his mother. And he said, "This is the most liberating day of my life." He came to England, picked us up, and we were on our way then to America, where we landed in Los Angeles, California. And about a year later, I met this guy who became my old man. And that's how come I come from Egypt.
Get your own Egyptian refugee crew members.
What?
They're fabulous. just to pick it up a little bit, Helen arrived in Southern California in 1961. We met in 1962. She had just come out of the Egyptian society,
Yeah.
the Alexandria.
Well, as my father referred to it as Oriental. We were Orientals in his eyes. I never felt Oriental, but he was an Oriental man.
Yeah, and it was a very structured society. It was a patriarchal society. She arrives as a teenager at the start of the 1960s in Southern California, just when the party was starting to kick off.
Yeah.
It's just a whole new life.
I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, really. I just thought, this is paradise. I was truly in paradise in those early years in California, and the beaches and the sun, and we had beaches and sun in Alex, but this was clean and American, and I was in love with America. I was in love with America.
And thus, she became an American.
Yes, I did. And I don't regret it. I am really very proud of being an American.
Once again, another fabulous art bombing of Helen's art on a bridge over the canal. It's there for you to take. It's only held on with Velcro.